So we want our sketches to get to be a little bit more picky so that sometimes they run the code and other times they don't run the code. And that's called a conditional statement. Sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no. Currently, the way processing is working is it just says yes all the time. It starts up at the top and it just runs the code all the way down. And it doesn't matter what happened earlier, it just keeps going down. The only thing that matters is if you're missing a semicolon, for example, it'll stop. So what do we do though if we want some parts of the code to only run if a certain condition is met? So think about conditional statements. We do these in our lives all the time. For example, I could say to you, if you turn in all of your homework, you will get an ice cream. So what's the condition? The condition is if you turn in all of your homework. Turning in all of your homework, that's the condition. And what's the reward? You'll get an ice cream, right? So we have an if, big statement here, if. Then we have a condition, and then we get a reward. It's the same thing in processing. There's a little bit new syntax that we have to learn. So we have our if. And think of this almost as like a comma, like I'm saying to you, if, comma, you do this, you get that. So if, and then in parentheses, we put our condition. So in the example I just gave, the condition is you turn in all of your homework, right? This goes in parentheses. Then we have an open curly bracket. And what goes in between our open curly bracket and our closing curly bracket, with of course a semicolon at the end, is the reward. All right, so here's my condition, here's my open curly bracket, here's my reward. I don't even like ice cream. I don't know why I gave this as an example, but you know, most people do. I have a semicolon and a closing curly bracket. All right, so you definitely want to take note of this. An if statement is not difficult. It's just a matter of remembering this new amount of syntax. So let's talk about where this would go in the rest of our code. So here we have our regular old setup and our size and our draw. And here processing is just reading from the top down. So it says, cool, you want me to do something that's pretty much a red and you want a rectangle. It starts at the corner and it covers everything, right? So this would be like our fading rectangle, but I've made it red. Then it comes to this if statement. And it sort of pauses for a second and it checks, did you turn in your homework? And if you did, it's going to run this code. And then it moves on merrily to this code. But if it comes here, so it starts at the top, it's going down, and if it comes here and you didn't turn in your homework, it jumps over this section and it just goes to the ellipse. And we never see that ice cream code. Okay, so let's look at this with a little bit of code. And I'd like you to copy and paste this code into a processing sketch. So, but first, before we do that, let's say, what do we think what's going to happen here? All right, so we start at the top. This is my fading rectangle. It starts at the corner, covers everything. And then it says, if mouse X is greater than 250. All right, so imagine this is my screen. So if mouse X is greater than 250, that must mean I'm over here, right? 250 is the middle of my screen. So if my mouse is over here, I get, my reward is a rectangle that is green, and apparently I can draw with it because it's a mouse X and a mouse Y, and it's going to be 50-50. And the rest of the time, so not contingent on any condition, just for free, I get an ellipse that is, I can also draw with. All right, let's copy this code and put it into processing and play with it for a second. All right, so I have it here already. And let's just do my auto format so it looks a little bit neater. And let's see if that's what we get. Yes, so over here, I get my ellipse and I get that rectangle. But once I go over onto this side, because the condition is not met, I am less than 250. My mouse X is less than 250, so I don't get my green rectangle anymore. I only get the ellipse. As soon as I hit over here, I continue to get the ellipse because the ellipse is not in a condition. It's just hanging out there doing whatever. It just is there for free. I continue to get that, but now I also get my rectangle and any attributes that I've set, such as in my rectangle, I said I get the green only if I'm over here. So my circle picks up on that as well. It gets green for free because that's part of what I get when a mouse X is over 250. I get a fill that is green. All right, so let's look at some more examples here and look at the terminology. So the terminology, this whole thing that we're talking about here is called an if statement. So if you're at a job interview and anyone asks, do you know what an if statement is? Yes, this is an if statement. Inside of an if statement, this condition here is called a Boolean expression. Fun to say, Boolean. Boolean expression. A Boolean expression can only be true or false. So that's how we get this conditional flow. Processing starts at the top. It hits the if statement. Again, this whole thing from the if to the closing bracket is the if statement. If this is true, it runs this code. If this is false, forget about it. It says I'm out of here, and it goes down to the next line. And that's exactly what we saw here. We only got this ellipse when this was true. Okay, so the terms I want you to learn, that this whole thing is called an if statement, and the Boolean expression is the condition that is either true or false. It is important to learn these operators, and they are listed in the book, so you can write them down or you can reference them in the book. The ones that I put in red are the ones that we will be using that are not as common. I assume that you guys will remember that this means greater than and this means less than. These two over here, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, are kind of self-explanatory, and honestly we don't use them much. This one we will use once we get into using our keyboard to control things. And so if you want to say that something equals something else, so mouse X equals 250, you're going to use two equal signs, not one. So what I'm talking about is when we are using this right here, this operator. All right, if you want to say it does not equal, we put an exclamation mark and an equal. We also will use these logical operators. We'll have conditions such as or. You could do your homework, or you could do 50 jumping jacks. Okay, so that's a logical operator. We have an or, so you do the two vertical lines, which you get through using the enter and backspace key at the same time. If you want to make a condition that is and this one we will use very soon, it is two ands, two ampersamps. And of course, the logic not is one exclamation mark. All right, so again, these are all in the book, and I will be giving them to you. The ones I made red are the most common ones that are a little bit odd. So here, let's look at some more examples. So assume that I had my void setup and my void draw. So I've initialized and declared a variable int x, and it's starting at 0. And now I have my void setup, imagine, and then I start my void draw, and I have a shape that uses x. And now it comes to this condition. If x is less than 100, x equals x plus 10. So what does that do? If x is less than 100, is it? Yes. When it starts out, it's at 0. It'll allow it to, well, let's just take this little bit of code and see what it does. Okay, so here I've taken the code and I've put it into my full sketch. So I have my void setup here, and I have my void draw. I made a shape and I put that variable in there. And here's my little if statement. So if x is less than 100, let's see what it does. It will draw. But then it stops once that condition is no longer met. So once x reaches 100, it stops drawing and it moves out. And I don't have any other code, so it just stops. That's all we see. So if x started out and it equaled 100, is this code going to work? No, because my condition says x had to be less than 100. So if x starts out at 80, you get the idea, it will run from 80 until it becomes 100. So if I wanted to, I'll put x back at 0. If I want x to go further along the screen, I need to change this number. So if I want it to go until 200, I would say if x is less than 200, let it move. So to start with, is it less than 200? You go up here. Yes, it's less than 200. So it will increase by 10 until it's no longer less than 200. And now it goes further. Here's an example of where we're going to be very picky. And we're going to say, not only do I want mouse X to be bigger than 250, so this is like the one before where I had to be on this side of the screen, but I also want my mouse Y to be less than 250. So if mouse X is greater than 250 and mouse Y is less than 250, then give me all of this stuff. This is my big old ice cream cone. So what is this going to look like? What do you think that's going to look like? Let's copy this. I'll put it over. Okay, so I have this set up and here with all the rest of my code. So let's see what I get. So when I'm over here, I'm not getting anything because I had this very specific condition. Mouse X has to be less than 250. Okay, so over here, or sorry, greater than 250. I am now, mouse X is greater than 250 and I'm still not getting anything. Well, because the second part of my Boolean condition was that mouse Y had to be less than 250. So now only when I'm up here do I get these two shapes drawing together. So I can be very, very particular once I start adding on, and you could have another one. I could have mouse X is greater than 250 and mouse Y is less than 250 and greater than 50. So you could keep adding on to this Boolean condition. So let's do one practice together and then I'm going to have you do one on your own. So let's make this statement so that what I want is to draw this line out and to have it stop halfway. All right, so I'm going to copy this code as my starting point and I'll do a new sketch. So first thing I need to do is let's just get it to move. X equals X plus 10, for example. All right, it's moving across the screen. So this is how I would always suggest starting. Start with first just plot it out and see that you have things in the right spot, and then you can make them into variables. So I have just my line here. It's very hard to see, but it is there. Then make it move, make sure it's moving. Then control that movement with the if statement. So I want to say if, let's move that down, X is less than 250, that's when I'm going to allow this action to happen. And I need my second closing bracket here. So this closing bracket goes with this one, and this is the closing bracket for the draw. And there we go. And now it stops at 250. Okay, one more. Let's do it with a diameter on a circle. So I need to add my closing bracket here. All right, so it starts out, my diameter is going to start out at 0. I put this ellipse in the middle, and it's going to grow by 10. Okay, but I want it to stop once it hits 300. So that means I'm only allowing this to happen while it's less than 300. So I would say if diam is less than 300, allow this movement to happen. And now it stops once it hits 300 because it's only allowed to grow diam equals diam plus 10 while diam is less than 300. So the starting condition of diam equaling 20 allows this to start running, and it runs this code until this condition is no longer met, and then it jumps outside and basically the code stops running. Alrighty, so here is an example if I wanted to take two shapes and they each had their own if statement. So basically I've taken the line and I've taken the ellipse. So everything I've put here in blue belongs to the line. It has its own variable. Here's the line. Here's the if statement for the line. Then I start everything that's involved for the ellipse. I didn't want it to have a stroke, or I have a stroke. I didn't want it to have a fill. Here's my ellipse. Here's the if statement for the ellipse that controls it and gets it to stop at 300, allows it to move in that if statement, the closing bracket, and then don't forget this last closing bracket, which is for the closing bracket for my draw. And so with that example, what I'd like you to do now is your own practice. I want you to make a new sketch and have a rectangle that's coming down from the top, one from the left, one from the right. I want them all to be moving, but I want them to stop before they collide.